What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with another reaction. In this we have The Blitz, a short documentary, fascinating horror. I love a good horror story. I'm gonna turn on one of these lights. My head is, I'm sorry if that makes me a little darker, but my head is pounding a bit. But before we dive in, if you guys happen to enjoy, please don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. And if you would like to support this channel by becoming a member, all you gotta do is hit that join button to receive your exclusive benefits. Let's dive right in.
On the 7th of September 1940, a year into World War II, Germany launched an unprecedented bombing raid on London. Until this point, German bombers had focused mainly on military targets. Now they turned their attention to civilian ones, in an attack that killed 450 and injured 3 times that number. Moreover, this attack marked a drastic change in German tactics. From this day forward, London would be bombed almost every single night for the next 57 nights, in a sustained campaign of destruction that became known as the Blitz.
57 nights they would bomb London. But my thing is, like, that sounds like a terrible strategy, if you ask me, like, because at a certain point everybody's gonna get out of London, and now you're just wasting bombs on the city that you're not strategically affecting the British military in any way, form, or fashion, because you're not hitting strategic targets anymore. You're just constantly bombing London. You're trying to send a message. I understand that, and you're destroying what was London the capital, doing it. But strategically, it just doesn't sound like a good strategy.
In 1940, France surrendered to German invaders. This left Germany, under the command of dictator Adolf Hitler, to focus its attention on Britain. Hitler had a strong desire to carry out a full-scale invasion of Britain, but there was one obstacle that stood in his way: Britain's Air Force. The Royal Air Force, or RAF, was formidable. Though it had far fewer aircraft than the German Luftwaffe, its pilots were highly motivated to defend their country, and were bolstered by volunteers from around the world. Britain's use of...
We know that Polish squad did damage. They did work. We got to give a shout out to that Polish air squad. They did their big one.
The new technology of radar was also much more advanced than Germany's, giving them a significant edge when it came to responding to incoming attacks.
Radar is huge.
On top of this, German attackers had many different objectives: destroying facilities on the ground, engaging in the air, and targeting and blockading ships in the waters around Britain. British fighters, on the other hand, were focused almost entirely on engaging the German threat. This singular purpose, combined with technology like the highly maneuverable Spitfire, allowed Britain's relatively small force to withstand one German attack after another. Germany's superior numbers, however, eventually started to wear down the RAF. Were it not for a chain of events that took place in August 1940, it's likely that Germany would eventually have prevailed. It was late in August when some German bombers accidentally dropped their payloads on civilian areas near London. Up until this point, Germany had aimed mainly for military targets, and so it was a shocking development that they should appear to target civilians. In response, on the 25th of August 1940, Britain bombed Berlin, enraging Hitler to the point that he commanded a change in strategy. German planes would now focus on decimating British cities, London in particular.
That was stupid.
The British government had long feared that Germany would launch a campaign against the civilian population. Some preparations had already been made. In 1939, thousands of children had been evacuated from urban areas to the countryside. Shelters had also been distributed to city dwellers. Anderson shelters were buried in back gardens, while Morrison shelters could be installed inside the home. Blackouts had also been enforced in many urban areas to make it difficult for enemy planes to locate their targets. Beyond these preparations, though, life had continued with some semblance of normality.
So Britain, I mean, in a sense, of course, you don't want Germany to attack your civilian population. That's the last thing you want. Um, but in a sense, Germany just kind of fell into Britain's hand, in like where Britain expected Germany to do this, so they had already made preparations for this. So in Germany doing this, they kind of did what was exactly expected of them. Which, if you're not strategically hitting military targets, you're wasting all that ammunition. And the RAF got one thing, one focus, and one focus only, and that's to knock y'all planes out the sky. And that's what their focus was, and your focus was you got hurt. You got when they did attack Berlin, that frustrated you, that infuriated you, and that caused you to make a mistake. And you started going after the cities instead of the strategic targets, and that's where you lost.
People went to work as normal, gathered in pubs and cinemas, and went about their daily business in cities that were, for the most part, intact. This all changed on the 7th of September 1940, a day that would later become known as Black Saturday. On this day, a massive German raid killed over 450 people and wounded more than 1,500 in London alone.
That is legit insane.
Shocking and devastating as it was, Black Saturday was just a taste of what was to come.
What?
After this date, bombing raids continued almost every night. Population centres such as Liverpool, Bristol, Manchester, Cardiff, Glasgow and Southampton were targeted. But
So
London was subjected
London.
to by far the most intense bombing campaign of all.
Just London was the most. Okay.
These raids were devastating. Whole streets were obliterated. Churches, schools, cinemas, hospitals and pubs were flattened or consumed by flames. Air raid sirens rang out every night, sometimes multiple times each night. Most citizens were, on a daily basis, exposed to death, destruction and scenes of absolute horror.
Man.
They lived their lives ready at a moment's notice to flee to shelters, where they would spend hours huddling cold and afraid as explosions rang out through the city above. When the all clear finally sounded, they would emerge to fight fires, clear rubble, bury the dead and treat the injured, knowing that, in all likelihood, the same thing would happen again the next night, and the next, and the next. Many famous London landmarks were damaged but not destroyed. Buckingham Palace, the Imperial War Museum, the Tower of London, the London Zoo, St Paul's Cathedral, and the Houses of Parliament were all hit but survived, in no small part thanks to the heroic work of firefighters in the city. While many famous buildings were saved, thousands of ordinary homes and workplaces were not. The Docklands area of London, home to many working-class families, was particularly badly hit. The nearby docks were a desirable target, and so attracted many bombs. This combined with a shortage of space in shelters and very few resources for rebuilding bomb-damaged areas to make the Docklands one of the places most severely affected.
Bro, I legit can't imagine living in one of these cities, areas that you're just constantly getting bombed and you know it's coming. 57 days straight is crazy. My days, but it's just hearing that every night and then waking up every morning or exact right after the sirens are going off. Now you're rising up to go fight fires, clear out rubble, help try to save people, help clear the rubbish. That's just a lot. That's a lot to do every day.
Despite the unending horror of the Blitz, though, life carried on. People went to work and some pubs, theatres and cinemas remained open. People were often pictured carrying on with their day-to-day work despite the devastation around them. There are many examples of people using humour as a way of dealing with the horrific conditions of the Blitz, and pictures from the time appear to document a sense of cheerful endurance. The attitude that prevailed, at least according to official accounts, was typified by the now famous morale-boosting campaigns run by the British government, with slogans like, "Your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory."
I love that.
And keep calm and carry on.
Keep calm and carry on.
This Blitz spirit is something that is often fondly remembered and has become a point of national pride, but at the same time it represents only some of the story. Subjected to nightly near-death experiences, many people suffered a range of mental health problems: night terrors, bedwetting, nervous collapse and psychosis. Some gave up on seeking shelter when the air raid sirens sounded. In the blackout-darkened streets, crime was at an all-time high, and there were few resources to combat it. Fear and nervous tension were pervasive. Personal records from the time reflect the fact that almost everyone was terrified and suffering, but had no choice but to carry on with their lives. The fact that they did carry on was viewed by the government as evidence of high morale among civilians, and this was used extensively for propaganda purposes. In fact, the stress and suffering of the British people was made worse due to the government not providing adequate shelters.
Like, just sleeping in, like, this cage is, like, crazy. Yeah, I just don't understand, though, how this protects you. Is that steel that they're sleeping in? Also, I guess if they do get bombed, like, any stuff that falls from the ceiling, they're protected from, like, not gonna be crushed by debris. I guess that's the nature of this cage. Y'all talk to me in the comment section. Okay.
Anderson shelters were damp and cold and would provide protection only from shrapnel and not from an actual bomb blast. Morrison shelters would protect those inside from collapsing buildings, but not from the fires or thick choking clouds of dust that often followed. Some dedicated shelters were built using incorrect materials, resulting in them simply crumbling when hit, providing little or no protection. There was great demand for deep, underground shelters, similar to those that the government had constructed for its own personnel. But the government was reluctant to provide these, fearing that if they were available to ordinary people, those ordinary people might retreat underground and never leave, thus hampering the war effort.
That's a like, to have to make that decision, dog. Like, we can keep them safe, but if we do this for them, they may not want to come above ground because they're getting bombed every day, which could hamper the war efforts. So, in building these underground where they'd be safe, this could result in them never wanting to come above ground, which hamper war efforts, which we lose the war, and then they're not safe at the end of the day anyway. But that's a heck of a decision to have to make.
As a result, Londoners were initially forbidden from using the tube network for shelter.
Wow.
Desperate, many Londoners did so anyway by buying tickets and refusing to leave the station during air raids. It was only after an escalating series of protests that the government relented and allowed ordinary people to shelter in tube stations deep below ground.
There you go.
These proved popular and were soon fitted with toilets, beds, medical facilities, and more.
Shout out to the people of London. Shout out to the British. Hey, they stood up. They said, yeah, we want to be safe. At the end of the day, we want to be safe, and this is the safest place to be. So, if you're not going to allow us to be here, that's fine. We'll buy a ticket and refuse to leave. And eventually, those protests, the government couldn't do anything about it. They had to give in.
These shelters, of course, were not without their hazards. Some years later, in 1943, 173 people died in a crush at Bethnal Green underground station. The worst single loss of civilian life during World War II to take place in the UK.
Oh my God.
As shelters were developed and people adapted to the hellish uncertainty of life under Blitz conditions, the bombing raids continued up and down the country. London was hammered night after night, while attacks on other cities were more sporadic but were devastating when they came. On the 14th of November 1940, the city of Coventry was devastated by a particularly prolonged raid, which flattened 4,300 homes.
God!
The destruction was so comprehensive that some German leaders would thereafter use the word Coventryet or Coventried as a byword for total destruction. In May of 1941, after an unimaginable period of near-daily raids, the Blitz came to an end, called off by Hitler himself. He now wished to send his forces east to fight the Soviet Union, and could not spare the air power needed to continue the relentless attack. Unbeknownst to him, however, the Blitz that he had overseen had already changed the course of the war, though not in the way he had hoped.
Yeah.
Hitler's shift in focus from hitting military targets to hitting population centers had allowed the Royal Air Force a chance to recover, rebuild, and reinforce.
That was very dumb.
Had the Luftwaffe continued to strike military targets, Britain's forces would have been decimated. As it was, they now stood a fighting chance against the German war machine. The people of London, Liverpool, Manchester, and other British cities who survived the Blitz survived a living nightmare, sometimes with very little protection or support. Their suffering, at least, was not for nothing.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what I figured. That was a terrible shift in focus because anger and ego allowed you to made you shift your strategy, in which they lost you the war, because you took that first L to Britain, then you couldn't beat the Soviets, then it was just all downhill after that. All downhill. So yeah, that's crazy to think about that, man. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comment section. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to subscribe. Give the video a thumbs up. Check out the next one. I'll see you guys next time.